This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Mark Gauss of the Kentucky 911 Services Board. I'd like to welcome you to another one of our educational training seminars, webinars. I enjoyed the first session of this, cybersecurity awareness, and I hope that you will too. I'm going to turn it over to Derek for an introduction, and then we'll get started. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And Derek, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Okay, Mark, this is Chuck Spalding. I'm going to go ahead and start. So first of all, thank you everyone for taking the time today to attend this webinar. And what we really trying to do is, provide some basic information about attacks, et cetera, that have happened to ECCs or PSAPs across the country. And just so you know, as we're going through this, we will provide a copy of these slides. You can certainly ask a question. Feel free to ask a question in the chat. And from a terminology, we use the term PSAP or ECC. And if you see a green background on the slide, that's really a best practice recommendation for your consideration. So this is the webinar. And again, what we've tried to do is make it real world. This is not an in-depth technical presentation. It's really to give you an overview of seeing what's been happening kind of across the country to various centers, who some of the actors are, what the attacks look like. And we also provide a lot of information in regards to best practices on things for you to consider. So this is a recent attack example in Oregon County where they had a ransomware attack that was pretty critical in that it basically took everything down offline except 911, which is what we normally hear in these types of ransomware attacks. And we'll go through these types of attacks and impact and some recommendations. But you can see, and I'm sure most of you have heard, hopefully you've not personally experienced what happens to a center when CAD goes down, the records, you can't access records, et cetera. But these are the types of things that we'll discuss. So what are the hackers' motives? It could be a disruption. If you're the target, it could be that they're trying in some way to affect 911 so people cannot access, first responders. It could be they're looking for money, which is a lot of this that we're seeing, where they're trying to get some sort of ransom or funds from the organization. And they see it as a target of opportunity. It's not unusual for them to realize that typically government agencies do not necessarily have cybersecurity budget, or have put in the tools, or have the staff really to address all the cyber uh, uh, nuances that are going on across the planet, right? There's a lot of cyber attacks, et cetera. And because government systems seem to be more vulnerable, we're often, um, the target. And then there's collateral damage. And this is typically what happens in the center, especially when we're talking about ransomware, is they weren't trying to take down your CAD system, right? They went after the county or your municipality in an effort to lock everything down so that you'd be forced to pay the ransom. And the collateral damage seems to be the majority of impact that we're seeing on the centers. So we're going to talk about TDOS. We're going to talk about ransomware. And but if you think about what the impact of any of these types of attacks, it can really basically delay dispatching first responders. We've also seen numerous attacks across the country where they went in specifically to get to the server that held body camera footage, right, to kind of destroy evidence. We've seen that. And then there's also the impact of financial loss to the organization should your organization decide to pay the ransom. And the ransoms seem to be going up, just like everything else. So we developed this. Really, this is not an in-depth technical presentation. This really is to give you and hopefully your staff the ability to kind of understand what's been going on and how it affects things. And it's really part of a larger kind of education program. And I know the state of Kentucky has been doing a lot of work in this regard. So we really are trying to provide kind of preparedness and awareness of what's going on and what's happened across the country. There's somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 911 centers, and there's been just thousands of attacks that have happened. And with that, I want to turn this section over to Donald Clavier.
All right. So discussing why PSAPs are vulnerable, the amount of technology in whatever you want to consider recent times that has been pushed into the PSAPs, the 911 centers, all of public safety as a whole, has exploded dramatically. You have your call handling that's normally done through technology nowadays, your CAD and all your dispatching systems, your radio and integrating with your bordering partners, any kind of records maintenance systems, and then other critical systems, email, the admin lines. All of those things are digitally controlled nowadays, and it makes them much higher on that target list simply because one simple route in can bring down multiple systems, which is the goal of those organizations that do that. So the traditional systems had their own vectors of attack, but the new system, adding all those digital systems, they increase that exponentially. Everybody has a user account that they have for themselves on their systems, and your account can let you access multiple systems. Each of them may have a different level of accessibility, and when you expand that more, you have one simple infection or one simple vector can instantly expand and make all your locations that you are attacked on that much greater. But to keep up with technology, you have to have those new investments, those new changes to next gen 911, simply because that's the way of the world. It's not like you can just sit in the past and wait. So the more we add to that next gen 911, the more things are changed, the bigger target they have to attack on. So, like Chuck mentioned earlier, that willingness to pay ransom. Our PSAP's roles every day heavily relies on that public view, that public interaction, that public confidence. And the systems that we have we all use, they contain massive amounts of data, which is critical for daily operations. If something happens, like say ransomware or any other kind of compromise, you want to get it back as quick as possible. So typically, even with the most basic of systems, the best systems, you're going to want to pay. A lot of people will want to pay the ransomware, which is the intent of the bad actors. They want you to pay the money because they can quickly get money from you and then just move on. You're just essentially a customer to them at that point. So for every normal protest, geopolitical you see happening out there in the world, there is most commonly the same kind of thing happening in cyberspace. The same time it's happening in cyberspace, it's actually a lot more individuals trying to do these cyber reflection or hacktivisms than you would think, because it's a lot easier to go after a city or a PSAP or any kind of organization digitally than actually go to the physical location, because that costs money, that costs other things, whereas everything's on the internet, everything's connected, it's easy to do that digitally. So that's one thing there that has happened a lot in recent times, is you will see a lot more of systems that are going offline for municipalities, cities, and PSAPs. And it causes, that goes back to that previous slide with the distrust or the mistrust that happens when that happens. So why do they do it during civil unrest? Everybody everybody knows of social media. You can easily put something out on social media or any other platform, and if you get enough people to share or like or retweet or whatever you want to call it, it now becomes false information and it's easy to spread. And then that turns into the last one over there, the loss of confidence, because they, without even calling, they're going to think, oh, well, we can't call 911 in our area. We can't call, the sheriff's office out. We can't do any of that. And then the cyber attacks happen, which lead to the confusion and disrupting of dispatch, which also relays back to that last one, the loss in confidence. Cyber attacks during civil unrest. It's a relatively newer thing. It's been happening for years, but I think the news has publicized it more, and it's more known to the average person of how much is happening, when it may just seem like, oh, well, the system went offline. Well, that's true. So a lot of it relies on the disinformation, being able to quickly share information, which spreads, and the loss of confidence, and then further disruption. So some of the ones that everybody probably is aware of recently, Minneapolis PD, during the 2020 protests, they were a huge target of cyber attack, simply because 2020 COVID, people were in their house. There was a lot of internet use at that time. Ferguson PD's website and email were attacked, and when they declined to indict the officer. So that also went into another example of cyber attacks and due to civil unrest. Public safety of the public, the individuals who work in PSAPs and public safety roles, their information was put out there in what's called the doxing attack, where they take and they publish your personal information, whether that's your cell phone, your home, spouses, family members, and a lot of that happens, and that's very dangerous, because everyone thinks, when they're going home, that they are in their safety. That's their four walls. Your work is work, house is house, and that's furthest from the truth for some people who are executing these kind of attacks. They're trying to make those people more vulnerable and more susceptible. And then other government systems being compromised during civil unrest in 2015. Baltimore's website and all of their websites went offline, and that drastically brings down the public's opinion of the government as a whole, because everything is linked on those government sites, from paying your water bill, sewage bill, trash bill, finding out public announcements, public local events, those kind of things. So all of these relay back into the disruption and the distrust, which all kind of play a part, and it's all in the digital front that a lot of it's happening. So what we'll cover over going on is why you should enroll in a TDOS protection system to detect abnormal traffic and keep those phone calls that are spam, or just trying to shut down your service away from your network or slow it down. Antivirus software, everybody should have it on all of their systems, servers, their desktop machines, their phones, and the reasons why, and then just common practices that help minimize the outside risk to your information. All of that crucial information, name, date of birth, address, medical information, all of that needs to be limited the outside access to that, simply because without that information, most of us, all of us, can't do our job. And then that last one is critical: creating a plan to allow the individuals that will be actively engaged and actively working or called in during a attack or during some kind of cyber event, knowing how they communicate, what they need to do to help mitigate if that's part of their role, and then recovery to get it going. The last thing you want is to have an attack actually happen and everybody's like, oh, what do we do now? What do we do now? Because then instead of addressing the actual problem, you're teaching people what they should be doing. So it's very critical to have that plan in place. Review it, annually, occasionally, whatever works for your local area, and state driven. The biggest thing is to have that plan in place so you know what to do during an attack, who to contact, how to react. That's critical.
Okay, Don, thanks. Now we're going to talk about different types of attacks that have occurred against 911 centers. We're going to talk about TDOS, phishing, these indirect attacks, ransomware, and then remote access to systems. So we're going to first talk about TDOS. Now, denial of service is something that when we first started talking about cybersecurity and kind of in the public domain, we were talking about DDoS attacks, and these were attacks where, let's say, they wanted to target the website for your county or municipality. They would come in and basically launch an attack by basically having so many servers or bots try and reach your server, that your municipal server, your county server, that it couldn't handle it and it would basically crash. And so TDOS is the voice version of that. So this is a typical 911 center. As we all know, we have our admin lines plugged into our local 911 server, so the call handler can both answer 10-digit admin calls or 911 calls in the same workstation. So these TDOS attacks that we're talking about first started back in 2019. The FBI got involved back then, and it started in the state of Maryland. And the individuals that were doing this are in the Middle East, some of them, and they were working for the first group, or it could be the same group today, that were working for the Palestinian telephone company. But basically what they started doing was they found the 10-digit line for some 911 centers in Maryland, and they were just started by calling that one center, and they would call, for hours in some cases when they first started off. And it was just, basically coming in using voice over IP. You can dial a 10-digit number from anywhere in the world. So they were just using that capability to remotely call. And we'll talk a little bit about what else they did. So the question might come up, well, how did someone in the Middle East find my 10-digit number? Well, there's a number of sources you can go to on the web, and this is a screenshot from the Federal Communications Commission. You can download an Excel spreadsheet, and it'll list every 911 center in the country, where it's located, and that type of thing. So getting the 10-digit number is not difficult, and we believe that they've spent a lot of time documenting, and they have all this available for them in the event of attacks. So these are the different types of attacks that we've seen, right? Basically, in addition to just singling out, say, your center and calling, what they've started doing is they will do a multi-state attack, and they use a conference bridge. And we know with a conference bridge, you can call in or dial into a conference, or it can also call out to you. And they use that capability. And what they would do was they would select their targets, anywhere from, say, 3 to 10 to 15 PSAPs, and they would simultaneously dial all of them, right? So if your call takers answer the admin lines, what they find is they're on a conference bridge with other PSAPs, right? Maybe there might be some in their local area. They might be in different states. and this causes incredible confusion because the obvious thing is you think, well, these people are calling me. Why are they calling me, right? And so everybody, it's just a mess. And you can see that how effective this is. Now we also know that they've done different tactics, and typically if a TDOS attack lasts for a short period of time, people typically don't report it. But there are some theories that they've actually dialed every PSAP in the country, right? And sometimes they'll just make 3, 4, 5, 10 calls, and where there's nobody there, and then they stop. But then they know they have the right number, and they flag it somehow in the database. But this is something that they have the ability to do, and at the scale that we believe that they're currently at, they could launch massive attacks like this to basically really impact your admin lines and your operations. So what's the best practice for this? A voice firewall. Now, in the world of 911, we don't want to block calls, right? And there's some view that we have to answer every call. Well, in today's world, we should answer every good call, right? And so there are these voice firewalls available, and these are very mature products. They've been around for a long time, and they've been in use for a long time in regards to like the financial systems, banking systems, call centers, commercial call centers. Probably every military base in the U.S. has one of these. And basically, like a firewall on the data side, which is really there to block malware and try and stop anything bad from coming into your data network. A voice firewall does the same thing. Now, the FBI put out a PIN, a private industry notification that went out. This was August, so it's almost 2 years ago. And because they were seeing so many TDOS attacks, they put this out, and they pushed them out through the Fusion Center. So hopefully your center received one of these. But it makes a recommendation in there to put in a voice firewall because of their concern about the potential impact on not only just one center, but the ability for them to really, take down multiple or impact operations, so many centers. Now, one of the side benefits of installing a voice firewall is it also blocks your robocalls, right? Because these products are connected to a list of bad numbers, so they'll just stop the robocalls from coming in. So I'm not sure if you experience, but a lot of centers still have issues where they get calls like trying to sell maybe extended car warranties or stuff. And that's really basically because the way these things are set up, the computer systems that fronts the people on the other end of the robocall, it just dials every number in sequence. So it's going to dial every number in an exchange, and obviously your 10-digit number is going to be one of those numbers. So this will basically just stop that. And so where will you put that? So you have a couple of options, right? You can either place it right in front of your 911 server, and that's where most centers are putting them, right? And they're putting them in there. And typically after they've had a massive TDOS attack is when centers will look at procuring one of these devices and installing it. And it also, like I mentioned, it has connection out, so it has a real-time kind of input as far as what are bad numbers to block those. And you set a threshold. So if you decide that if I get more than like 20 calls from this number in like 2 minutes, just block it, and then it'll flag it and inform you. But you can also go in and manually input a number. So let's say you have a citizen who's calling up, harassing you constantly, and you want to put them on block for a period of time. You can manually go in there and just stop it. We've seen some centers where they use this where somebody's calling, let's say, a detective. So this is where we've seen people put it just in front of the phone system, right? You can go in and block it so that you can stop those harassing calls from coming in from that specific individual. But these are incredibly effective. And again, it's still kind of a new thought in the 911 community to do this because we are so adverse to the idea of blocking calls. But if I can stop robocalls and stop a TDOS attack from coming in and stopping my operation, and that's a great thing. And it's also the concept of a firewall. You have a regular firewall in your data network, and it's there to stop bad stuff. And you don't really know if it's functioning or not, right? Hopefully it's working, and which it does. You don't know how much malware or attacks are trying to hit you. And this would be the same thing. It's just going to stop all the annoyance and really protect your center and stop your staff from being impacted from these types of calls. So now we're going to talk about 911 line. Unfortunately, these actors realized pretty quickly that they were affecting the 911 center, but they really weren't hitting 911. So you can see there in the middle it says hacked PBX. What they started doing was breaking into phone systems. And if you think about cybersecurity, we typically use the term cybersecurity. Everything's on the data side of the house, right? And so a phone system, and if you think about how many businesses are in your jurisdiction that have their own phone systems aren't typically uh, included in this concept of protecting and being diligent around cybersecurity. And so they're pretty easily hacked, according to the FBI, right? We're seeing that they've been doing this. And so what they started doing was they singled out hospitals initially. And so I was a 911 director in Palm Beach County, Florida, where I live, and we had 20 PSAPs. And what we experienced was this. They were breaking into hospital phone systems, whether it was a Cisco switch or whatever they happen to have, and then they would start dialing 911. So this is incredibly disruptive because your staff's getting 911 calls from a hospital, and you don't want to block those calls, right? So it's a big deal. And we know it was the same actors, or the FBI knows the same actors, because what they started doing was they would still use the conference bridge attack vector, and they were calling 911, supposedly from a hospital. And when the call takers answered, they'd be on a conference bridge with other PSAPs. Now, the other PSAPs may have also had a 911 hack, or could have been the 10-digit admin line hack. But they've tried various different of these types of attacks. And from talking to individuals at some of the major carriers, they said they've seen hundreds of these scenarios where a hospital PBX was attacked. But we've also had reports of them just breaking into law firms and things like that. And a lot of times these attacks happen at night. So if you can imagine your night shifts they're manning the desk there, and all of a sudden the hospital's blowing up the center with all these 911 calls. If you send a deputy out or an officer out to the hospital, kind of find out what's going on, nobody there has any clue of what's going on, right? Because they're not doing anything, and they're going to have to call the local IT shop. And I know in the cases where I mentioned here in Palm Beach County, Florida, uh, the IT department at the hospital couldn't figure it out, and they had to get Cisco, like tier 3 support, to be able to get in and actually take control of the phone system, because the hackers had complete control over the phone system, right? So we've seen this over and over. And so the concern is we don't know how many of these types of situations where they're already in and sitting, right? We know a lot of stories we hear about cyber attacks is that the bad guys get in and they're in there maybe for months, right, before they do anything. So it could be that they have control of lots of hospital PBXs or other PBXs across the country that they just haven't activated yet. So this is a big concern, and just something to be aware of. The second thing that's happened quite a bit actually is, if you're still on a legacy regular E911 system and you're connected into a selective router, those 911 lines that are coming into your center, even though they're 911 trunks, they have because they're part of the phone system, they have a 10-digit number associated with them. And the FBI believes that these hackers have somehow gotten a hold of like a do not call list from these robocall companies. It's not unusual for a center to report that they got a robocall coming in on 911, because again, these systems, they just dial every number in the exchange, right? So when they do that, they're going to hit, even though those numbers are unlisted, they're still dialable. And so the fix for that is to just talk to your provider, because this is a simple configuration change for them, and ask them to configure that switch so that those 10-digit numbers cannot be dialed from outside. In the state of Utah, there was an instance where hackers came in. They had all the 10-digit numbers for a metropolitan area, and which was all on a selective router, and then they just started dialing 911, dialing those 10-digit numbers from overseas, and they did really disrupt operations for quite a while before they were able to figure out what was going on, because those trunks are, again, they're just a 10-digit number that can be dialed from anywhere. So this is it's an easy fix. It's just something you need to be aware of and make a request, or maybe an inquiry to find out how yours are configured. Now, the top one is with this voice address spoofing. This is really of concern because, again, with voice over IP, you still comes in with PNEs, but you can change the address. So if I have a 10-digit voice number at my home and I move, I had the ability to just myself go in and change my address, right? So when I move, so the calls will come, if I make a 911 call, the address that comes up will be the address that I put in. And so what these actors have done is they have voice over IP lines, and what they've done is they'll select the target. So let's say they select your jurisdiction, and they'll go in and they'll find a valid address that's in your jurisdiction. Typically, it's a business address, and they'll just put that address into their 911 into their VoIP numbers, and then from overseas, from the Middle East, they can use those numbers and start calling 911, and the VoIP provider will start routing those calls based on the physical address that's provided, and they'll come in as 911 calls over VoIP into your center. And so this is a big concern, right? Dealing with this, but it's something we need to be aware of. But it's very effective, and we have all three of these to be aware of, and just make sure the staff and et cetera are aware that these types of attacks are available to them. One of the challenges we have with 911 is that the FCC doesn't really encourages the carriers not to get involved with blocking 911 calls, right? And this was an order that was issued out to all the carriers a few years ago in response to all the robocalls that are going on. So they were telling the providers, you can certainly block robocalls, but just make sure you don't block 911. And unfortunately, from the FCC's perspective, they believe that the centers themselves are equipped to determine how to handle the calls. But in these types of TDOS attacks, which is, clearly we don't have the technology to do it per se. So what can you do during a 911 TDOS attack? Well, what we've seen is centers are typically have really inventive staff sometimes, and we've seen different things that people have done. A lot of the call handling equipment providers offer the ability to use an IVR. Now, we don't normally want to have an IVR on a 911 line, but if you're getting attacked and you're getting overrun with all these TDOS attacks, one way to do this is to turn on an IVR where the 911 caller would have to just press 1 or 2 or whatever to get through, and that will help block those calls from coming in. We've also seen centers set it up so that they will have a specific set of workstations that all the VoIP calls will route to. So that means that when they turn that function on, then all the voice over IP calls that are these fake 911 calls will only route to a workstation or a couple of workstations, rather than going across and affecting your entire operations. You may be able to also, we've seen some carriers do this where they've reached out to their provider and say, hey, here's the numbers that are coming in, or here's the PNE that's coming in from this, and I want you to send all those calls to a cell phone in the center or something, some way to have those calls because they don't necessarily want to block them, right? And just have them route them somewhere. So again, it doesn't necessarily affect your operations. But having one of these three options here is really something you should consider. We've seen a couple of scenarios across the country where they've done a joint attack, meaning when they select a target, let's say they select your center, and not only are they pushing and overrunning you with on their admin lines with like a TDOS attack, but they're also doing it on the 911 lines at the same time. And so this can be major. This could basically take you out of service and prevent actual 911 calls from being able to get in. So again, it's important that we are aware that these types of things can occur. Luckily, they've only occurred a few times as far as the reports go in the country, but it is something that we all need to be aware of as far as capabilities. So now we're going to talk about other types of attacks, and we're going to talk about swatting. Many of you are aware and maybe were affected by, there was been a rash of swatting calls, and it went on for about 18 months, starting back in October of 22. And this is just some numbers from a National Public Radio. NPR put out a report. Just in a few weeks, you can see that how many they hit. But there were thousands, probably up close to 3,000 centers were affected during these rash of calls. And here's just some more numbers. You can see how bad it is. But what was discovered is that the perpetrators for making all these calls were people who were doing it as a service. So someone was paying them to make these SWAT calls. And there is a social media platform called Telegram. And if you go on there and do a search, there are a number of people or individuals who will place SWAT calls for you. Most of these people are not located inside the United States. And again, they're calling a 10-digit number, so you can call that from anywhere on the planet. And so the concern about this really is the fact that someone paid a service to do this and do it thousands of times. One of these individuals who was on there, in fact, it was this individual. What they did was they were making these calls, and then on their website. In fact, when this first started, I actually went to their Telegram, went to that website, and I saw it. And he is actually posting audios of the calls he was making, and he said he was being paid. So somebody took the time to hire him. They provided him the 10-digit number of the call. They would tell him the name of the school that he was supposed to be at when he was calling a fake active shooter school, and they would give him a script of what to say. So if you can think about someone who would pay for thousands of these, that's a real concern that these types of things are going on. And you can see this guy even has his price list here for, he'll do it for, whatever you need to do. And the concern is, and it's from talking to the FBI, even if they go out and find this one guy somewhere in Europe or Middle East, and they get him supposedly, or take him out of service, there's so many other individuals online who are offering this as a service that it's just a big concern. It's nothing you can't just stop an individual, right? It's just something that's out there today. And so what can you do about this SWAT calls? Well, we know SWAT calls always come in on the 10-digit lines, whether it's this scenario I'm talking about now or just in general. And when we mention these voice firewalls, they also, most of them also offer options where they can go in and validate the calls like in a millisecond. So they will first look at the 10-digit number that the calls of every call coming in. They'll determine, is this a real number? Because not every 10-digit number is in service. And then they'll also determine by the data coming in that is this number associated with the carrier it's supposed to be associated with, right? So they might call in and just, because they just randomly pick numbers. So you might come in, the spoof number may be a Verizon wireless, for example, when it's actually say an AT&T landline, for example, and then they can flag that. So then they can flag that for you or just block it for you, right? But then if you allow that call in, your call takers are understanding. They get a notification that this call spoofed, this is a bad call, and so they can use that information to pass it on to the first responders. That this call doesn't look right, so they know going in that this could be just a SWAT call. So now we're going to talk about phishing, and Donald, I'm going to turn this section over to you.
All right. So, social engineering, it's a fancy term, a big term for malicious activities accomplished through interacting with the end user to gain something, whether that's gaining access, gaining information, just gaining and exploiting that information. It tricks the user into making a mistake that they normally wouldn't. Because they're normally in they're thinking. They normally do it during like a busy time, which in PSAP world, that's all the time. So a lot of it happens all of it happens via human interaction, and it's a trick for their trust. How do they get you to bite? We've all received scam emails. They always tell you, hey, you have to do this now or else. And then by not acting quickly, if you don't do this by such and such time, you're going to lose your opportunity for this, or you'll lose your account, or you'll lose fill in the blank. And then in recent times with COVID and everything else, the personal health and the importance of that is huge. Or saying, hey, there's been a uptick in a specific virus in your area, in your community, in your area. So those are some ways that it works. Like I said, we've all received spam emails. They're not all the same. Some of them are very clever, very deceptive, and as time goes on, those become more and more that way. So phishing, like it shows there, it's 90% of the successful attacks. They're trying to get information from you. Like I said, username, passwords, credit card details, or just other operational information. And they're always hidden behind a shroud or a cloud of looking like it's a official communication or a legit communication from a specific company, person, fill in the blank. It relies on that human nature. You're getting caught up in your work, your tunnel vision, your day to day, and you click on something or do something that you normally wouldn't do if you were not busy or not slammed. And that's, in the PSAP world, that's uncommon that you're not not busy. So a lot of it has to do with the human interaction there, and so they're expecting you to click on something, and that's how it works. So phishing has multiple ways. These are some of them right here. Spear phishing. It's targeted for an individual target or a group. Clone phishing. It looks like it came from an official source, and we in future slides will actually show an example of that. And then whaling, that's the high valued target. So spear phishing is one that goes out there that I think a lot of us may have experienced. It's typically a target. They're going towards like a specific group of people, whether they have something in common. They're all purchasing people. They're buying things all the time. They're all dispatchers. They're all whatever the common category is. They send out those phishing attacks. They're going to send out as many as they can to that group, and the message is going to be very curtailed to like their day-to-day operations or their daily life. And it's very deceptive because it provides you with that, like I said, that momentary lapse in judgment. You're going to click on something or go to a website or do whatever it wants you to do. And had it not been under that quick pretense and saying, hey, you have to do this now, it wouldn't have happened. Clone phishing, another common one. You'll see emails from Amazon or from CVS or Walgreens or any kind of thing that looks official. It may have the official company or, business that you're dealing with letterhead, and it looks very similar. But there are, problems with that. as in the email address where it's coming from, or misspellings in there. Those are some of the common things, but as time has gone on, they kind of, those are not as common. They're going to have properly spelled emails. It will just be coming from an unlikely source, or it's not the legitimate website. Whaling. In PSAPs, there are many individuals who are at a higher level, and with that higher level comes multiple systems that they have access to. And that's where the danger comes. So they target those high value employees because if they can get their credentials, their username, password, credit card information, whatever that is, they have a higher chance, especially if you're using the username and password area, to be able to go laterally on the network and see what's available. Whereas your traditional call taker or dispatcher may not have the ability to go over and look at some county controlled system, someone that's a PSAP director who interacts with the county that they in or their local jurisdiction or area. They're going to have that access because they need to interact with the other elected higher officials in the area. So that they're a very high value target, and they want to get their information because they typically have the quickest spread when they're able to compromise his or her account. So the events in the world always encourage the bad guys to do more bad things. They use seasonal events a lot that you'll see. Like I said, all of us probably have a personal email, receive scam emails, and you'll see them around the summertime coming up. Now you'll see ones for, summer vacations or holidays or something like that. So a lot of those happen, and they very curtailed to the specific time season or time that you're in. During COVID, there was a lot of emails that came out that were curtailed towards like public health and public disasters and public in your local community saying, hey, there's an uptick in, COVID cases or whatever it was. And then recently, tax season just ended. So the uptick in emails before tax season ended that was coming from spam individuals was it's up there because they're trying to get in the sense that everybody knows, hey, tax day is this day. I need to get my taxes done. Oh, I just got an email from the IRS or H&R Block or fill in the blank. So it's very curtailed to that specific season. And then also outside of the season, it's your area. They're going to curtail these phishing campaigns or these phishing attacks. They're going to curtail it to what is big in your area. If you have a high tourist area or you're near the water and there's, boats, lakes, those kind of rental things out there, it's very curtailed and it's very targeted. It's quite sophisticated for as annoying as it is. So, like I mentioned earlier, there is an example of a spoofed email. A couple of things that you'll see is it's coming from someone called Help or Health Help Desk. That may be a normal email for you, but it's not something that is, if you're not receiving the email, that should kind of bring a red flag to you. And then also it has a bunch of organizations listed down below. And none of them have any kind of official logo, nothing in there. They're saying, hey, there's a confirmed case of this disease in your location. I can speak from, me only. I never received an email from any kind of health organization saying, hey, your next door neighbor has fill in the blank. So something like that related to COVID was out there, and it's pretty rampant, and it did affect quite a few organizations out there. So just general things to look at is what's going on. Is this likely? Those kind of things. So how spear phishing works, like I mentioned earlier, it typically comes from something that you would know or trust. As an example, if you have insurance through Aetna, and then you're always buying things on Amazon, Walmart.com, and Target.com. So if those are kind of your bread and butter where you work at, that's what you're buying, that's what you're working on. The message is very targeted to look like something that's legitimate. As an example, you may be purchasing things for your organization. You might be the person who goes out and buys things that are just common use items. So you're constantly using Amazon, you're using Walmart, Office Depot, whatever it may be. And they're going to target this email to look like it's coming from that organization or that company. And normally, under normal circumstances, you would trust that email because you're expecting an update for your order, or you're expecting an update, or you're expecting an invoice. So relying on the fact that you have already done business with that organization and you're trusting that the last X number of things they've sent you, when it has an attachment, has been legitimate. It's an invoice, it's a notice of delivery, or whatever it might be. So they're relying on you being trustworthy of the recipient. Once you receive that email, you actually open it, you click on the link. They're going to steal your access to your account that you're currently using, and they're going to use that to then see what's on your computer, see what's on your network, and see what is the value or how much information is there. Typically, they're not looking at the raw contents. That's not always the truth, or that's not always fact, but they're just looking at, okay, this person has a lot of data, and then they look at it as a valuable target, or and maybe a not valuable target. But that's what they're looking for, is to see how much data they see you interacting with and working with. So phishing examples, like I said earlier, uncommon requests or situations. It is very rare that a help desk, a IT help desk, or an IT organization will say, hey, here, you need to update your password now, and they're going to send it to you via email. There may be some kind of notice saying, hey, you got to do this, but there's not going to be click here to do it. There's going to be policies and procedures in place that you would need to follow. Uncommon situations, the PSAP director, the county manager, the city, the mayor, the board, someone, they're not going to email you directly about your health benefits. Now, there may be some exceptions out there. There may be smaller municipalities and cities that have that kind of relationship, and the mayor or someone in that position would email you and say, hey, make sure everybody does this by such and such date. And those are few and far between, as opposed to something like this. Hey, we're asking you to update your health benefits as soon as possible, and it comes from your CEO or someone like that. Fake email addresses. This is very common to do. It's very easy to fake an email address. If you constantly deal with someone from the city of Fairfax, Virginia, or city of Baltimore, you might not even look at the whatever it is, .com or .org. You may just look at it as second nature. But that's one of the things that is very telling for a lot of times for those phishing emails. It will have a fake email address. It may have a description or a header that says the person's name, because you may deal with someone named John Smith, but that email address following it should draw your attention and say, wait a minute, that's not the normal email he or she or they contact me from. Fake URLs, they're going to try to get you to click on this link to do something. One of the things I can say about URLs, it's critical, and this is a personal and professional thing, is hovering over the link. Computers nowadays, if you hover over the link, it's going to show you when you click on that what it's going to do. It's going to show you what website it's going to, and if it's not a normal website that you would go to do that, that should raise some of your attention and hopefully gather you to say, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. Urgent, this goes back to the earlier thing I mentioned. Urgent, your password's expired and must be reset immediately. Click here to reset your password. Click here to do this. Illegal activity scares. We've experienced this in our area. We have had people who had received emails sent to mass groups that says, hey, we've been watching what you're doing on the internet. You're dirty. We're going to tell your boss. Contact this for information. Once again, it's just an attempt to either get your account credentialing information. That's very common, or just to get money out of the person. And then unclaimed prizes. Click here to get this valuable $50 gift card, or click here to get your free 10-month membership to such and such organization. Once again, it'll say something along the lines going back to an urgent. This is a time-sensitive thing. And people, it's just human nature. They like the free things. So thinking about things like that, at work, all of us probably use Amazon or similar personally. And then you turn to work and you're like, wait a minute, why am I getting an email from Amazon about an order that I didn't even order through work or I've never used my work email for? So just some unlikely situations, unlikely scenarios, unlikely things. And then, hey, click here for your free money kind of situation. So those are just some examples. There's a lot more out there. So with tax season having just passed, this is an email that you could have seen in your email. It's once it says, hey, we noticed we changed our privacy policy. There's maybe a change. Download the file. A couple of things that should be noticeable to you. All of these things, the address at the bottom of the email, the header at the top where it says IRS and Internal Revenue Service, all of those are legitimate links, which if you have gone to the IRS or seen the IRS, those are legitimate addresses, those are legitimate links, those are legitimate pictures. But that doesn't take away from all they're trying to do is get you to click on this link in that moment of, wait a minute, has the IRS ever emailed me before? Have they ever sent me an email where they wanted me to click on a link? If they're looking at here, it talks about a new policy and download the file. Most of today's environment, if they're going to send you a file, it may be in the email, or you're going to hear something on the news about something. Hey, they're going to be contacting you. The IRS is notorious for regular traditional mail, so this should also raise some flags if you have not ever interacted via online or email with the IRS. So credential theft, all of those examples I gave you, they're trying to get you to click on a link. Once you click on the link, it's going to do something. Most of us probably use Office 365 as our product support today for Word and Microsoft, all the Microsoft products. Countless times, I'm pretty sure we all have clicked on a legitimate link that came from a coworker to go to a SharePoint or look at a file online, and it brings you to a page that looks like the legitimate. It is the legitimate website for Microsoft, and it wants you to log in. You then log in, and it brings you to your document or whatever it may be. A lot of times they will use something like that, and they'll send it, say, hey, click here. It'll bring you to a sign-on screen. Most of us in today's age, we're like, okay, we haven't signed in on our web browser for today or whatever. So they're going to want to enter your credentials, and then it's going to bring you to a correct site or just maybe a general page. It might be like your PSAPs or your counties or municipalities local welcome page, and you're like, wait a minute, why did I click here? All they were trying to do was garner your credentials so then they can use your account to go left and right. Some of the things that you'll see when they do that is they just want you to enter your password, and you won't instantly notice anything funny. Your account will be working fine. Everything's working fine. It's just what you were going to look for. You're like, wait a minute, I didn't even take me to there. So that's what they're trying to do is get your account information and then use that for their own gain. So in attachments and fake links, instead of a link, a lot of times they will attach a document, a Word document, an Excel, a PDF, any kind of thing. One of the common things you've all probably experienced personally is you got an email that said, hey, here's your invoice. Once again, that's a big, not always a red flag, but that's a big indicator of, okay, this person I've dealt with before. It might be my contact for my software vendor. They have sent me attachments before. However, I have not ordered anything from them. There's nothing due. I don't have anything coming up. Why is this coming? What they're trying to do is get you to click on that document, open that document, because you're trying to see what it is, just the common human nature of being curious. You're going to click on it, open it up, and as soon as you do that, it may look like a traditional invoice, or it may look like a traditional document for whatever. Typically, they have a lot of things that are attached to those documents, macros, executables, things that are happening in the background that are unknown to you. They start doing things as soon as you open that document. You're like, I didn't even order this. Why is this coming in? Kind of thing. So that's a very common thing. Most email filters nowadays will kind of give you a hint if something's funny looking. But you can't rely on that. It has to rely on the human nature and the human interaction to get it to work. So just paying attention is the best thing to do. So here's best practices. The Cybersecurity User Awareness and Training Program. Setting up a robust program online, typically using one of the many vendors out there, is not complicated. Even someone who is not tech savvy can set it up. You're just an administrator and you go through and click, hey, I want to send out these kind of phishing attempts to this group, and having that be something that is regularly done. Simply because, much like riding a bike, practice, repetition makes for the best end user and makes sure they're ready to respond when they do it. And it never should be used as a punishment tool. There should never be like a public chastising of someone who clicked on a link. It should always go back to the educational side of it. And if you have your cybersecurity user awareness and you send out a phishing attempt or a phishing test for the organization and someone clicks on it, it shouldn't be like a personal conversation. They should just have to do some, remedial training, maybe review this section of the cyber training, maybe do this again or whatever. And in that same cyber training, you would want to know how someone can identify, and I mentioned a couple of them, hovering over it, hovering over links, hovering over attachments, looking at the email address, the from, and all of those information, looking for majorly misspelled or just misspelled words in general, and then also just general odd activity. If I'm not your account representative for your software company and I email you, that's off if I'm emailing you an attachment that says invoice. And then what to do with that? Do you send it to your IT help desk? Do you report it to your supervisor? Do you, there's a lot of steps then in there that could happen, but how to do it. Phishing tests, that's one that I mentioned, a little bit ago, but at the same time, I think that should be done regularly. It shouldn't be as part of a check the block kind of activity. It should be done on a regular rotational basis. A lot of the software programs that you can invest in nowadays, you can set it up to to test quarterly X percentage of your users. It's something that could be running continuously. You could be getting one once a month. It really just depends on what you're trying to implement in your area. Identifying and reporting those emails, critical. You got to know who and where, and then clicking on links could be dangerous. Hovering over them is helpful, but clicking on any link that's sent in an email is dangerous. You need to make sure, hey, this is legitimate. I'm expecting this from Donald or Chuck. I'm expecting these documents or this link. Not all of a sudden we sent you something and you're like, oh yeah, he sends me stuff all the time and we haven't talked in 8 months or something. So just paying attention to what's out there, and then keep reiterating the importance that they're the first line of defense. The end user is always, the staff is always that first person who receives the things, notices the things. A lot of organizations don't have a robust multi-person or a hugely staffed IT department due to budgeting and just general accountability. So a lot of it has to do with making sure the staff knows, hey, you may not know much about computers, but you are the first one that's going to be able to stop something. Personal email. So all of those information, all of that stuff is great, but if you're allowing someone to access their personal email, or to use their personal email at work, and they completely throw all of your guidelines, the training, and all that stuff out the door, it's totally useless. All that stuff that you're doing on your official work email and your official work account, nothing is, it's more of the wheels off when it comes to the amount of attacks and amount of things you'll see coming to your email. All of us have a personal email. If you have a phone, you have some kind of email attached to it, and they send spam emails every day. Some of them are mixed in amongst legitimate emails, and it's a real concern because a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, that with the doxing thing, you have, when you're looking at your personal email, a lot of people are able to turn off their work mind and that's great. But at the same time, if you do that and then forget, oh yeah, if I click on this email that's on my work phone, it does have the potential to infect my work account in my work computer. So it is a recommendation for social media and personal email access, especially web-based email or any kind of web-based or personal email, social media. You should not allow on the PSAP network. Your computers are critical. That computers and the data that you access on those PSAP machines and networks, it is critical that that information be as far away from the regular internet, quote unquote, as you can. This is one that's very difficult sometimes to have people accept or work with, or but it's a man. I would say you should try to make it mandatory, simply because the amount of things that can be put on social media and personal email, if you're not applying that same diligence when you're on your personal stuff or your social media, it makes all of that critical, and the vulnerability and all that training and work you've done on your work side, it's out the door. It's useless.
All right, Donald, thank you. So now we're going to talk about indirect or outside attacks that are not on the 911 system, right? So ransomware is one of the big topics, right? And we know what that is, right? They're basically going to hold you for hostage. You're going to lock your systems down and hopefully have you pay them money to decrypt everything. So this is just an example of ransomware that happened in Dallas County recently. And you can see they paid $8.5 million, but they were fortunate. They did get the keys to decrypt their files, but it was a major attack. It took down everything. Not only did it affect, CAD records, et cetera, it basically took all the other county offices offline. So how did they get into PSAP? This kind of plays into what Donald just went through. The majority of the attacks that occur with ransomware and affect operations really start with a phishing attack, right? There are also browser-based attacks where you have staff just happen to go to a website that's been infected, and the malware will just jump into your system, or it could be with ads, et cetera. So there's also an insider where maybe you have a disgruntled employee or somebody who's getting ready to knows they're going to be terminated, who might do something, but there's multiple ways they can get in. So lateral attacks are typically what affect us, meaning that when there's a ransomware attack, it didn't initiate or begin inside the center. It happens somewhere else, and then the malware will walk through, and I'll kind of give you an update of how that works. So we have two networks, luckily 911 and dispatch. And so this is would be affecting our dispatch center. So in the top right, you see ECC 911 server. You've got your 911 call coming in, and then you have your push, right? Typically like a serial cable that goes into the CAD system. And that's a one way. So there's no way for the CAD to push anything back, luckily, to the 911 call handling equipment. It's usually a one way scenario. So for this example here, we're going to look over in finance, and somebody in finance did something they shouldn't do, which was kind of click on something, and you can see malware starts walking through. And because everything's on the same network, CAD's down, and you can see there's a firewall there, but the firewall is protecting things coming directly in from the internet. And in this case, because it was inside the organization, and we initiated the click, for example, and brought the malware in that way, the firewall doesn't stop it, right? And so we're down. So one of the things that we're recommending that you consider doing is putting in a firewall between the ECC and the rest of the organization. This was something you talk to either your CAD vendor about or your local IT department. But in the event you were able to have a firewall there, and there was a ransomware attack that took down your whole organization, you'd still be up and running, because that malware would be prevented from walking in and taking down your CAD and your records and all your other critical systems. What we see typically is after someone's been hit and gone through some devastating effect, like living through trying to the CAD's down, they'll look at doing something like this. But it's an easy fix, and it certainly will help you prevent your critical infrastructure from being affected. So if you do get hit by a ransom, you really have only two options. You either pay or you can restore from backup. So if you pay the ransom, doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're actually going to get the keys to decrypt, right, and to restore your files. There are on what they call the dark web. There's a lot of people who offer for a service, which is ransomware for service, meaning that anybody could go there and initiate one of these ransomware, pay for a ransomware kit, and then go after you, for example, try and get someone in your organization to bite on an email, for example. And then if they're successful and they get you to pay, the service provider will keep a portion of that and you get the rest. So in many of those cases, they don't even have a key to decrypt it, or maybe they just don't even care. I got the money, I'm just done. So it's important to understand it. Paying the ransom doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. You get the keys. So best practice really is to have backups. One of the challenges we have, obviously, in 911 is we trust our vendors. We trust the vendor's going to, we have a maintenance contract typically. We expect that they're going to do things, but we've probably never asked them if they're doing backups, right? Are there backups, current backups of our systems? And so in the case of ransomware, like we talked about, if your CAD's down, and you have a good backup that you can restore from, that goes a long way to kind of helping you quickly restore service. But you really have to ask your vendor, what's the situation? Do I have that? And if the vendor doesn't have it, you may look at either working with your IT department, or if you have some technical people in the center, figure out a way that maybe you can run your own backups. But in some way, if you do get hit and go down hard, having a backup is a key way to help you restore. So I'm going to talk about cryptojacking. You may or may not have heard about this, but this is really where someone gets into your system and they're not trying to take you down. They're just really trying to use your system to make money. And we're calling this the third wave. The first wave, which is something we don't rarely hear about, was when hackers were breaking into big corporations, let's say Target or other companies, and they would steal all the credit card data, and then they go on, quote, the dark web and trying to sell it. Ransomware is much better for a hacker because he's in control, right? He's locked your systems down, and he's hoping you're going to pay him direct. He's going to make a lot more money, and it's much easier than trying to just sell stolen credit cards. And so this is really the third wave. Really, they want to use your electricity, your computing power, and the network access you have to basically mine cryptocurrencies. And there's different ways to do this. So if we think that today, if you walk into a store, you pull out your credit card, and you go to that point of sale device and you tap or you insert your card to make the purchase, that point of sale device goes out. It might go out to Visa, it might go out to your bank, and it validates the transaction and it's approved. In crypto, it's used with something called blockchain, but it requires that there's multiple nodes on the crypto network, or either on the Bitcoin network or Ethereum or any of these other cryptocurrencies or cryptos that are out there to validate a transaction. So if you have a validation node on that network, then you can make money. You get a small percentage of every transaction. So if I can break into your CAD and put this software out there and connect into that blockchain with your network, then I can just sit in the background and I can just make money just by stealing your resources. So this is an example that happened out in one of the mid-Atlantic states. The state paid a cyber agency, cyber security firm to go out and do a kind of a cyber benchmark. And what they found out across the state, about a third of the CAD systems in that state had this cryptojacking software on it. And so the only way you're going to know about that is really if you look at your outbound traffic. And typically we don't do that. A firewall is looking at traffic coming into the network. It doesn't look at anything going out. And so what this firm did, it was looking at the outbound traffic, and it found a number of PSAPs that they're that coming from their CAD was all these international and all this other network traffic. So the bad thing about this is it's tying up your resources. And if you think about it, in the center, we have busy times and then down times. Well, this software is running basically full tilt all the time. So it's going to potentially impact the life of your servers, et cetera. And it can also impact performance. And in some of the centers, this firm was doing this cyber benchmark. They had, they talked to staff, and a lot of them were complaining about CAD was always so slow, and they thought, well, we just need to wait for the next refresh, or we need a software update or something. Or you may have a situation where they notice that the electric bill's gone up dramatically if you have an astute financial people who are looking at things to see, hey, what the heck's going on here? So, but it is something just to be aware of. So one of the best practices that we also recommend around cyber is to disable the USB ports in the center. You don't want your staff coming in with a smartphone, which may be infected with something, and plug it into a CAD port to charge it, right? And you don't want to allow your staff just to bring in a USB drive and plug it in themselves. So that USB drive may have malware on it too, unknowing to your staff. So is this a pretty easy fix? You just ask your vendor to lock it down. They have the admin password, so if they come in and they want to do a software update, if they need to put their own USB drive in, they can unlock it, put it in, and lock it back up. But it's a simple fix, and it's something that potentially can help your center not be affected. So other best practices, this is just mentioned some things like suspicious activity on machine, software installs they don't recognize, etc. Machine running slower than usual. This is a big one, right? And then knowing who to report those observations to. So now with this, we're going to talk a little bit, Donald, talk about remote access.
All right. So remote access, something that, some PSAPs rely on heavily. Some of them don't. However, it is very rare that you will have a vendor that you work with that supports one of your softwares that does not have some kind of remote access to your network. Unless you're lucky and have a local contact for the vendor, you're going to have that remote access. And as soon as you open that up, it enables a slew of other attacks and other things, because there are websites out there on the dark web and tools that hackers and bad actors use to scan for vulnerabilities. Every piece of software, computer, when it's talking back and forth in whatever direction and to whoever, it uses specific communication ports. They're very isolated typically to that process or that program or that style of data that it's using. But to allow someone remote access, you have to allow that port. So on the dark web, they're scanning for these ports to be open, and they're going to try to start to, leverage those ports to gain access remotely into your network. So that's where they're constantly trolling. They're just searching for those open ports. One thing to relate it to something you all probably know very well, is changing the default password to any item that you obtain that connects to your network of any kind. Every device, printers at your home, you'll have things, your refrigerator, your thermostat, your camera system, whatever. That default password, it's well known. You can Google default password for fill in the blank product, and if it has a network connectivity, it has a default password. So allowing that remote access into your system is very critical. You're good. You can go next one. So you have to get the support from the vendors, but that also comes with a very much a heavy risk. So vendors have been known to be an infection point for ransomware. They have been known to be providing you with legitimate support, but the machine, the device, the item they're using to support you is not taken. It's not given the same care and due diligence of their work machine or something similar. It might be their just remote machine. So you have to take into that when you're doing your risk management and your cyber hygiene practices. They rely they rely, or you rely on them so heavily that you have to make sure that they're keeping up to your standards. Don't let them dictate the standards. And that's kind of a difficult conversation to have, but you need to say, hey, this is how we do this. And, get on the phone, get on an or conference call, whatever you got to do to figure out how you can make sure that this is the way you want things done, and here's how they're going to meet it. So one of the things, as you can see there, is can technicians remote into your system from their home computer? This is one that is pretty big because a lot of people, like I said, it goes back to the doxing and the other things that I mentioned about personal. You're in your personal environment. You're not maybe as aware. From an IT perspective, you may not take as much care of your personal computer as you would, say, a work computer. And if that's your support route back into another system and that system is compromised, that's easily spilling over into your environment. Do they have the same policy for USB drives on their machines at work and then also their remote support machines? That's critical. They have to be able to have the same policy that you have, the same procedures, and then understand why you're doing that. In today's age, thumb drives are used and external hard drives are used, but in today's age, there's a lot more people who rely heavily on the cloud sharing aspect, OneDrive, whatever the online platform is that you choose. And the same concept there. You have to realize that that's another vector of attack, and remote access is the easiest route in. So have that conversation with your vendor. And then the last one, technicians having a unique username and password. Just like everybody at work should have a unique username and password. That way I know that this action was performed by Chuck Spalding because he took over from me at 11:50 today or whatever time it was. And the keystrokes are linked to him. Now, that's not to crucify or hang someone out to dry all the time. That's typically meant so it's very unique. That way we know if those actions were done, it was either Chuck or Chuck's account that was compromised somehow. And the same thing goes for those technicians. You call your software vendor, you're talking to them support, and you're like, hey, I need help. And it's the same, not always, but you have that relationship with one or two or three of the techs. So each of them having their own unique password links the action or the changes back to them. So best practices, they typically have remote access to your call handling systems or any of your systems that are in the PSAP environment. Annually or at a regulated time, request an audit of who has access to your system. Talk with your vendor, your account manager, account representative, whatever they're called, and say, hey, who has access to my system? One thing that is out there is with PSAPs, you guys are dealing with CISA information. With that being said, obviously the person, unless they are in your state, they have to be certified by your state to be able to view that CISA information. Now, most of the time they're not, but at the same time, requesting an audit of who has that is critical. Pushing them to have an individual log on. That way, you can audit and see who has access. How do they handle their account terminations? Do you get notified? Counties, PSAPs, jurisdictions, they all have their own way of handling a termination, a resignation, promotion, any kind of activity. Whether that's an email, whether that's a public announcement, portal inside for the employees, something. But how do they handle it? How do you know when the vendor that you always call and you used to talk to Donald and get support every week, how do you know when Donald's no longer an employee? Now, you shouldn't, that's something that you could work with your customer service rep or something like that and say, hey, I need to know when you're terminating people who worked on my systems. And then keeping it disabled and only open it up for the period of time when your vendor needs to use it. That's a very critical one, simply because if I leave my system open all of the time, then it's open all of the time for everyone, which allows more opportunities to attack or try to get in. Typically, there is a very rare chance in my work that you would have to leave it open for an extended period of time. Typically, turning it on and off is not as difficult as a lot of people think it is. Oh, you have to have a lot of tech savvy knowledge. That's not true at all. There's very simple things you can do to kind of limit, or not limit, but turn off the remote access and then enable it when you need to. So the
Okay, now
next
we're going
part
to
we're going to talk. Oh,
go
I
ahead.
guess you. Yeah.
So we're going to
So yeah.
talk a little bit about, yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yep. So the next part, cyber hygiene. So there's a lot of steps that users can follow to maintain their network health and online security. The PII, that the amount of PII and other personal information that, social security, name, date of birth, medical problems, medications you take, that a PII has in their infrastructure, in their systems, is it's in the millions of lines of text. So you have to realize that those practices that individuals and you take as a team are protecting that information, because once again, it goes back to, if that information is lost, you cannot you cannot do all of your job effectively. So protecting that and cyber hygiene is how you do that. So software updates. We always trust our vendors to keep our system updated with the latest security patches. Security patches, they update for numerous reasons. There's a feature functionality out there that suddenly popped up that someone was able to test, and they say, hey, if you do these 3 things that in a row, you can gain access, and now I have administrative abilities instead of regular users. Sometimes it's just adding an additional button or a call out or something for there. And then bug fixes. Apple is notorious on the cell phone world to push out updates for function. And I kind of look at it in the sense of, I'd rather have that than have the opposite, where my phone or my PSAP or my system is completely offline. It's important to understand what your policy is and the vendor's policy is for who does the updates, the security alerts, installing them, how often it's done. In the tech world, there's Patch Tuesday. Every Tuesday, Microsoft pushes out Windows patches, which is the most common system that a lot of PSAPs use. So, you have that time frame. Not saying you should be jumping on Tuesday afternoon and pushing them, or your vendor should be, but you should have a regulated, or a regular cycle of when that happens. Individual logons for all users. That's kind of a showstopper, not non-negotiable. You have to have that single username and password per individual, not a shared account, not anything like that, simply because there is no, if I was logged in as CAD_1 and I was working the day shift or I was working night shift, so 11 p.m. to right now, and I leave and I restart the computer, and then Chuck comes in and he logs on as CAD1, and then at 11:28 today, he did something, or there was something that happened. There's a very rare chance that you're going to have cameras in your center to kind of say, oh, well, that was Chuck. It's more of a he said versus she said, argument. So make sure your vendors have that practice as well. Everybody has to have a single sign-on account for them specifically, not a shared one. Passwords, complex passwords, as it mentions there, upper, lower, numbers, and symbols. Regularly change passwords. CGIS drives you to change your password more often than the average county most of the time, especially when it comes to those systems. And don't post your passwords where they're visible to people visiting. Don't put them on a sticky note, put them under the keyboard. That's the old commonplace. A lot of phones, or not a lot of phones, all phones today, if you have any type of phone, they have a password app that you can download that will generate passwords, that will save them. They will allow you to implement 2-factor authentication on those password applications if you would like to. And then never send passwords over the internet. Don't send someone an email and say, here's my password. And don't use the same password across logins and accounts. That's a big one. A lot of people will do that. They will share their passwords from one to the other because we all have to log into so many systems. MFA, It's just a layered approach to the security. All of us probably use bank accounts online, those kind of things, medical access for our benefits. And they say, hey, we're going to send you a text. So MFA could be set up as simple as a text or a physical token. It's just a, hey, you say you're this person, let's verify you're this person. It's always deployed in layers. It does add a little bit of work. One of the best things to do is implement it slowly and not just, hey, on Monday morning, we're going to be doing this. Everybody has to have their token. Everybody has to be doing this. It's a slowed process, slow rolling process. Why it's so important. Passwords and username and passwords are important because they are the first line of defense of keeping the bad actors, the hackers, out of your network. Like it's been mentioned before in the phishing attempt, 90% of all attacks result from an employee action like clicking on a link or an item. And then people are always so busy with their day-to-day operations, their day-to-day work, that they get tunnel vision and they do something like the phishing it. They want you to do something that's out of character for you. They want you to click on that link that you're like, wait a minute, I don't ever use Amazon at work or whatever. So a lot of it has to do with just that false sense of security, and people just get into the humdrum of work and say, oh yeah, I clicked on that, oops, kind of thing, as opposed to I don't use Amazon via my work email. And then the same thing here, credentialing for outsiders. If you're bringing someone in to do mutual aid, it may take longer to set them up, but they need to follow the same principles when they're setting up. It's common that people will try to set up like generic accounts like mutual aid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they bypass if there's multi-factor authentication on those. They just set them up, and then mission happens, business happens, the mission creep, work creep happens. You forget to disable those things. So it's best to spend a little bit more time when you're creating them. Everybody has an individual account. Once that mutual aid operation or work is done, that's canceled back. And then the same thing goes for your vendors. If you have another vendor coming in, a partner, a vendor that you work with, but now they're contracting to another one because you're asking for more software, hardware, they need to follow those same procedures for credentialing. Everybody has their own account, has their own password, has their own MFA if that's what we're using. And it just stays there. That way you don't have to think, wait a minute, when we brought that partner in, did we do this? Because it will just be second nature.
Okay, now we're going to talk about responding and reporting cyber incidents. So it's almost inevitable. We see this over and over again that systems are attacked. And one of the things that we're really good at in 911 and emergency management is putting together plans. We typically have plans for active school shooter, plans for natural disasters, et cetera. But the majority of centers today do not have a plan on what to do if there's a cyber incident. So, for example, CAD's down. One of the challenges that we have today is, we've had a lot of turnover the last few years in the centers of staff. People are retiring, new people are coming in. And so you don't necessarily have that experience from the past where people know how to, okay, CAD's down, we're going to run, use run cards or something like that. And so it's important to put some sort of plan in place on what I would do if CAD goes down. We've seen this over and over again on in centers where they've been hit with a ransomware attack, CAD and records are down, and then they on the fly try and figure out, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this work? Right. And we've heard these stories of centers that they eventually come up with a plan after maybe a couple of days of how to kind of restore and get dispatch going. But it's always good if you could do in advance, put together a plan on how to deal with an issue like that. Now, from building awareness, CISA offers a free poster that you can request, and you can customize it so it talks about who to call. So you could put in a list of names for, let's say something happens, who I should call, and also in advance look up like your local FBI field office, other numbers that you might want to put in there. And this is something, it's a poster, you could kind of blow it up, put it in the break room, you could have your your floor supervisor have a copy of this and availabilities, but it's just an idea of explaining to people what could possibly happen, what to do, but more importantly, what to do in an event that I do get hit. An incident response plan. Now, this is a simple Excel spreadsheet that was put together. You could build something like this. So again, if your night shift gets hit with something, they can just pull this up and know, here's who I should contact, right? I should tell them this. And if there's any action that I should take or you want them to take, you can put that in this. So there's a simple way to get started with that. And again, having something like this is better than not having anything at all. Now, CISA offers a number of guides and resources available to you that you could use to start, to get started with this. And you could download this and maybe have go through it with your vendor or have discussions with your local IT shop about if we get hit, this is what we should do. And again, these are all free resources for you. But a basic response plan would include everything listed here. And having that, again, the impact on staff, I've talked to, numerous people who've unfortunately been hit with ransomware. And if you talk to a dispatcher who is in the middle of dispatching an event, and one case is the dispatcher was telling me a baby had stopped breathing, and they were in a process of doing a dispatch, and then the CAD system automatically just went offline, and then she watched all these files being encrypted. So, it's pretty devastating situation to deal with. So having a basic response plan available and potentially training with your staff is really important in today's world. There are also a lot of other resources that are available. We'll talk about, some things like risk assessments and stuff that are free and available to you through CISA. And here is kind of a recap of what we've gone through today. That we are either a direct target, which would be on the 911 side, admin line side through attacks against the voice networks. And also we're indirect targets because of, collateral damage or something else. But they can certainly hit us in numerous ways. And again, TDOS is a real threat. There are things that you can do to help mitigate it, especially on that 10-digit lines. Ransomware can cause weeks of downtime. We've heard the horror stories. I'm sure individuals on this call have also heard or read about situations where how long it took a center to restore CAD. In some cases, they didn't have any backup and they weren't allowed to pay the ransom, so they basically had to rebuild it from scratch. So backups are critical. Essential records program around this concept of continuity operations. And then there's some basic things, that low-hanging fruit that you can do as far as disabling USB ports, trying to limit or ban, social media or web-based personal email in the CAD systems. These are basic things that you can do. And then working with our vendors. Again, we trust our vendors so much typically because we're busy doing other things, but talking to them about the basic things like Donald talked about, remote access, requiring unique username and password. I know when I first took over Palm Beach County, one of our call handling vendors, they have a central help desk where you call in, and I posed a question. I said, "Do you have a unique username and password for my system?" And it turns out that they were using a single username and password for admin rights to all of their customers. And so, that makes them think also. So asking questions is always a good thing. And phishing really is the biggest threat, as Donald mentioned, because that's where most of the ransomware activity happens, is because someone just wasn't aware and clicked on something that initiated the problem. And other best practices, we talked about individual logons, software updates. And with our vendors, this can be an issue because typically we rely on them to do maintenance. So let's say Microsoft has a critical update that they're recommending that people put out immediately. From a vendor perspective, you have a maintenance contract. They have to get a tech out there, so they're going to be on a list. There's been reports it may take sometimes 4 to 6 months before a center will actually get what was labeled a critical update done. So it's something that you want to talk about with the vendors. And then bottom line the last page here is really talking about putting together a basic plan or actually putting together a detailed plan and exercising it, but knowing what to do, especially if CAD goes down, having a plan around that is really critical today. And we also know that there's a lot of help out there for free, and we're hoping that you'll take advantage of it. And so with that, really just want to say thank you for taking time. I know if you work in a center, you're responsible for a center. Time is a critical commodity during the day. So thanks for taking care of this. And really, we hope you found this program of value, especially as we walk through some of the attack vectors, some of the phishing information, and then also the ransomware. So again, we want to thank everybody and thank the staff in the state of Kentucky for putting this together and for inviting us. And so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them at this time. Okay, so that's it. And again, thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you, Donald, Chuck, and Derek.